Good evening, everyone. I'm Yeti Redmond. I'm the director of the Big Scream Halloween Community Festival in Dublin's northeast inner city. And our guest tonight is Dacre Stoker, who is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, who, of course, wrote Dracula back in 1897. Now, Dacre is a great friend of our festival. We first met when we were installing a mural on a house on Buckingham Street, where Bram Stoker lived from the ages of 11 to 17. And the 6 years that he spent in the northeast inner city is longer than he lived anywhere else in Dublin. So we are really keen to highlight this fact. Now, apart from being Bram Stoker's great-grandnephew, Dacre is a very well-known best-selling international author, as well as a family's expert on Bram Stoker and his works, the most famous, of course, being Dracula, which has sold millions of copies around the world. And Dracula also holds the distinction as being the most portrayed literary character in the movies, which is a pretty amazing feat. And tonight, Dacre will be exploring Dracula's enduring appeal, not only in cinema, but in other forms of popular culture, in his illustrated talk, which I believe promises to be both entertaining and informative. Now, if you're interested in talking to each other, chatting to each other during Dacre's presentation, you're more than welcome to use your chat box at the bottom of the screen. And if you have any questions for Dacre, send them via your chat box too, and Dacre will be happy to answer them at the end of his talk. And by the way, just to let you know, tonight's Zoom presentation is being recorded. So Dacre Stoker, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Yeti, and thank you and your committee for your ongoing efforts to highlight Bram in the north side of Dublin. It seems that he gets plenty of attention in Clontarf, plenty of attention at Trinity and Dublin Castle and the Dublin Festival, but I'm glad that you guys are doing it as well. So it's sort of bringing full circle Bram's impact on the fair city of Dublin. I only wish I could be there this year. Normally I am there, but because of our COVID, we're in our homes, somewhat bored, and hopefully entertaining you with some of these cool stories. So what I'm going to talk about now is something that I don't usually talk about because I'm not an expert in the movies. I do like them, but what I'm bringing you is sort of my list, some of my favorites and some of the more, let's call them influential stage productions, film adaptations, and other things that are inspired by my great-granduncle's book. Just so you know, there are over 700 movies with a Dracula in it. There are over 1,000 comic books and stage adaptations. As much as I'd like to bring all of those to you, we do need to get on with our day. So I'm going to have to narrow that down just a little bit today and bring you sort of the superstars of movies and different things that were adapted by Bram Stoker's novel in the 123 years since it's actually been published. So I call this Dracula from novel to stage to film, but I could also say, and everything in between. So as Yeti almost already mentioned, I've been on the Dracula trail for a little while. I started in 2009 writing Dracula the Undead. In the process, I found Bram's Lost Journal. And then the biggest success has been the prequel that just came out a couple of years ago and was the #1 horror hardcover in Ireland and all the UK, which was Dracul, the story of Bram writing Dracula, fictionalized as if Dracula was real, and plenty other fun little videos and things along the way. But to get this rolling, I like to personally get in the mood with this montage that I'm going to share with you. And as you watch it, just sort of take a look and see how many of these movies you think you've seen over the years, which ones pop up in your mind, and that'll get us all flowing into our talk tonight.
was the people. I was betrayed. Look what your God has done.
So this amazing montage was actually put together by a film festival called Retro back in Granada, Spain. I was a guest of. And what they do is they took all these old Dracula movies and showed them throughout the week. And they also showed old Monty Python movies throughout the week. So that was the combination to keep you entertained. And one reason I like to show it, if remember the last two clips, the one with the metamorphosized looking bat, that was Gary Oldman in the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. And the important thing in that scene is that that has nothing to do with Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. That line was not even in there. Look what your God has done to me. I have been betrayed. That's the screenwriter, Jim Hart. And we've done our presentations together. And he told me exactly that he wanted to create a special myth of his own that they showed at the beginning of the novel to do something Bram Stoker didn't do in his novel, which was, how did Vlad the Impaler get turned into a vampire? And the whole thing is about his wife obviously jumping out of the castle when they were being sieged by the Ottomans, committed suicide, and therefore she couldn't be buried and have a consecrated graveyard and a church service. And he was fighting for Christianity, fighting for the church. And so then he got mad. I was betrayed. Look what your God has done to me. He stabbed the cross. It bled. He drank the blood, turned into a vampire. That was his own mythology that they created. It wasn't Uncle Bram's. And then the very last one, which was, of course, that famous scene in Nosferatu at the end where Count Orlok is exposed to the sunlight and he gets destroyed. Now, again, in Bram Stoker's novel, the sunlight simply reduces the power of the vampire. It doesn't destroy it. So what you're going to see this evening as we go through these different film clips, there have been many different adaptations, obviously, of the book. And there's been different things that directors and producers change. Sometimes it's just to exert their own creativity. Sometimes it is to freshen up the genre, freshen their approach. And other times it's just too difficult for their budget or their producers to film Dracula the way Bram Stoker wrote it. As a matter of fact, when I came to Dublin for the 2009 One City, One Book Festival, the poster had a quote by Christopher Lee saying, nobody has ever filmed Dracula like Bram Stoker wrote it. And it's true. There's a close one that we'll get to in a little while, and I'll show you which one I think is the closest to the novel, but that doesn't mean they're not bad. I think most of these movies are good. If they're inspired by a work that Bram Stoker did, I think he'd be pretty happy with a 123-year run of it too. So before we get into the movies, this guy never did get into the movies. There's been some documentaries made about Vlad the Impaler, but he is the guy that Bram Stoker saw references, two of them actually, one book in the Whitby Library and the other in the London Library, and it's all about Vlad the Impaler. And the connection that I have now realized with more research into these London Library books is that both of these books, one by Wilkinson and one by Samuelson, are actually connecting this fellow, Vlad the Impaler, the bloodthirsty warlord ruler of Wallachia, to the devil. They both reference the devil, and that's what I believe Bram Stoker was looking for. And you see this castle Poenari is the fortress that Vlad hung out in from time to time. Not really much to do with Castle in Brasov. So that's sort of a more movie type thing. I love to display cover art. I like to sort of move back from the movies to the book for just a little while, just to tell you that over 1,000 editions in 30 languages since 1897. The book has never been out of print. It's in public domain in 1962. Over 700 movie citations since Nosferatu in 1922, and over 1,000 comic book and stage adaptations. Certainly very prolific, and I think Bram would be very proud to this day, even with the movies and other adaptations that are not exactly like his book. Now, I need to point out also that Bram wasn't the first one to write a book about vampires. It was actually the first book in English literature that had a vampire in it was John Polidori, Lord Byron's doctor, who wrote The Vampire in 1819, followed up by J. Malcolm Rymer, 1845, Varney the Vampire, and Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu writing Carmilla. Those are the three that well-known books predated Bram and Dracula. And then, of course, you'll see the other ones that at least I put on the list. And this is a list actually by the Horror Writers Association, who shows that they have had the most significant impact really on readers and their transformation into different forms of entertainment. And then I had to put in, for my own good reason, Dracul by myself and J.D. Barker. And I will say that Twilight, although it bears no resemblance whatsoever to Bram Stoker's Dracula, was still a mighty force in getting people interested in reading books about vampires, even though it really strayed off into more paranormal romance. But the franchise that it created, very, very powerful, very popular. And then maybe sort of a second tier down, these are some of the ones that have attracted me over the years. As I said, I can't put them all in here, but I think they made significant contributions as well. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was not only a movie, but a TV series. And then Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse series got turned into the very successful HBO series True Blood, which ran for 4 years. And then Steve Niles, who I've got to know quite well, he was a graphic novelist, which is an interesting way to start an incredible movie, 30 Days of Night, set in Alaska, which was a fantastic graphic novel and a really good movie as well. And down at the bottom left-hand corner, Salem's Lot, which was a book that certainly hit the mark with one of the most famous horror writers of all time, Stephen King. He had that turned into a miniseries. And one of my favorites is Let the Right One In. There's a Swedish version, and it was so popular the Americans had to do one. I personally like the Swedish version better. And then The Historian is a novel by Elizabeth Kostova, and it's an interesting read, but a very realistic sort of search for a Dracula creature that is the Dracula creature we all know, but he was yearning for power, and in this story, power is knowledge. So he was like the ultimate librarian, and he would sort of go off and collect these incredible books because knowledge is power. And I had to put in Dracula the Undead by me and Ian Holt, just for personal reasons. Now, I've just recently got into this world of graphic novels, and I'm actually adapting a couple myself along with a team of very talented people. Jessica Martin from London, and Chris Macaulay, who's actually a Northern Irish guy living in Edmonton, Alberta. And we're actually going to be adapting some of Bram Stoker's short stories into graphic novels. And I used to look at them before and say, oh, these are nice reads and interesting reads. But I didn't realize how hard they were to actually do adapt and how many people have to be involved to get them made. It's almost like making storyboards for a movie. You've got to get that vibe of telling the action in photos and not many words that I'm used to doing. Now, as we know, besides books and comic books and movies, the Dracula is firmly entrenched in popular culture. And if you look through these, you'll see top left-hand corner, we actually have Dracula venturing into the X-rated movies, as well as Dracula Dead and Loving It, which we'll see in humor, and then Sesame Street, which is the children's show, and then games, computer games, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and Dracula, Mad Monster Party, and then adult beverages, vampire wine, Bloodweiser, a takeoff on Budweiser beer, Bugs Bunny, and even children's books. Now, if you like any of the things I'm talking to you tonight about and want to reference these and get more information, I highly recommend you find these two books, because these are the ones where I got 90% of my information from. John Browning and Kay Picart's Dracula in Visual Media, and David Skoll, who actually spent a year at Trinity College while he was researching his latest biography of Bram Stoker. He wrote what is probably the Bible of Hollywood horror movies, Hollywood Gothic. Now let's move to the stage. this is one of these things a lot of people make a mistake about. They say, oh, poor Bram Stoker, the last thing he did was a flop, which was create a play version of Dracula. Well, they're right. There was a staged reading of Dracula, but it wasn't intended to be an actual play. This was a formality, and it was a very interesting formality. He had a legal background as well, so he knew how to do things right. The Lord Chamberlain's office says you have to have a playbill, you have to have people in the audience, you got to have a production, and then you have the dramatic rights for your book protected. He didn't do this only to Dracula. He did to some of his other stories as well. So the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see an image. This is the stage script at the British Museum, and the little picture above is the actual playbill. I've seen the whole thing, and what he did was he actually, with a pair of scissors, cut and paste an early edition of Dracula, and it was actually put together, one script, and passed between the actors and actresses who were just sitting on chairs on the stage reading. It took 15 actors to perform 4 hours, but it was done 8 days before Dracula was published on May 26, 1897. Now, because of that, Bram Stoker left one heck of a legacy, but also an inheritance for his wife. We've all heard the stories that she had hard times for the next couple of years because Bram didn't have a pension from the Lyceum, didn't get an inheritance from Irving. So he had a meager salary of selling some books for the years between Irving dying in 1905 and Bram passing away in 1912. So those 7 years was a little rough on Florence and Bram. But when she got this turned into a stage play in 1924 with the help of Hamilton Dean, she started making some money back and actually made a lot of money when this stage play got sold to Universal for the actual film rights. Before we go on, though, just here's another look at what you can find if you go into the British Museum in London and request to see this actual script. It was not a script for a certain play. It was simply a formality, and you can see what Bram did. He had stage directions, writing directions for people, and he just used his book to get it all done. And because of that, and because Florence first started actually trying to do it herself, this one in the top left-hand corner was actually an effort she did with a writer by the name of Charles Morel. And apparently it didn't go very well. And she learned her lesson and went to somebody else. And that was the Irishman, Hamilton Dean. And he helped her adapt to the novel. Now, think of that problem, as I mentioned earlier. It's an epistolary style, many different characters, points of view, all saying things. You know, in each chapter, there might be 5 or 6 different transitions. Very hard to turn this into a stage play and a movie. So much adaptation had to be made, merging of characters, merging of locations. And Dean did that. So you can see in 1924, the first Dracula was actually Edmund Blake, and then Ray Huntley in 1927. And it wasn't until after 1927 and the play had success in London, and you can see Huntley's already wearing the dinner jacket, the cape, the high collar. The high collar actually was helping with a stage prop because wires were attached to the high collar. So when the Dracula turned backwards to the audience, the wires could hold up the cape, and Dracula could go down in a trap door and disappear. So this is something that was very functional, as well as a classy nighttime looking attire. And then, of course, we enter Bela Lugosi. Now, Bela Lugosi came over from Hungary. He actually was an actor over there before he acted here. Dracula wasn't his first role, but it was one of his first English-speaking roles. And so what's interesting about Bela is that when he first started uttering the words, and you'll hear those in a few moments, he had to speak his lines phonetically, which actually gave the sort of persona of this Eastern European Count Dracula even more power because of the way he spoke. And funnily enough, he bears no resemblance, neither did Blake or Huntley, to Bram Stoker's description of his Count Dracula. So the change needed to be made for a very good reason, and that is Victorian stage productions were used to having attractive looking leading men. If you look carefully and go back to Dracula and look at the pages, Bram described his Count not as this handsome man you see in front of you now. He had hairy palms. He had this long nose, eyebrows meeting in the middle, horrible breath. He was much like a revenant coming out of the grave. That wouldn't have gone over well. So the transformation began early. It's not just, in the last few years when the Draculas and the female vampires look like runway models. It's way back to try to get the audiences really on their side and sort of attracting the females and not repulsing them as well as the males. So Dracula got off to a good start with Lugosi, and then of course it stayed on stage for a number of years, and then it faded away with the movies taking over. And then in 1977, Edward Gorey kind of came back on Broadway, and look at the set design that he created. Bottom left-hand corner was so popular. The bottom right-hand corner is actually a model you can buy because it was had such a cool vibe, a Gothic vibe to it. So he is credited with a lot of success, and also the fact that Frank Langella was playing Dracula, and at the same time he went on to play Dracula on the silver screen as well. One of the only actors, like Bela, that did both stage and screen Draculas. Many think that Nosferatu is the first Dracula. As a matter of fact, Gary Rhodes, who is a tremendous researcher and has lots of information to share in this department, has actually found a Russian or a mention of a Russian film even before this Hungarian film from 1921. We're not exactly sure what's become of it, but if Gary can't find any records or any film clips, then probably nobody can. So I misspoke. 1921 was 1923 was the first premiere. There was a book adapted from Dracula and then turned into this movie. So I don't have moving film of it, but we do have a couple of still shots. So look at this Dracula, top left-hand corner. That's actually more like Bram's Dracula than even Bela was. And if you look down on the bottom in the middle, you'll see the posters for it. Dracula, ha la la. We'll see this again pop back in the moving films in just a minute. One of the things I learned about this was the Hungarians had very advanced cinematography equipment, as did the Germans, which we'll see in a while. And this was something that really proved very well when we see these movies and the quality of these movies. So along comes the famous Nosferatu. The thing that everybody asks me about is, why did Florence Stoker, get so upset about this? She almost ruined this for the world. She made them destroy all the films. Well, to set the record straight, I've actually seen all the letters back and forth between Florence Stoker, the British Writing Society, who represented Bram sort of as a guild, and the lawyer in Berlin. Bram had died at this point, and they put up a bit of a struggle to represent the widow. She recognized there was a copyright infringement. They never actually came to her and asked for permission. None whatsoever. They just made essentially a knockoff film, a copyright infringement film. And when the German courts, after 2.5 years, ruled in favor of her and the British Writers' Society, who were paying these lawyers, they said to Nosferatu, you've got to pay the settlement to Mrs. Stoker. And they said, we're bankrupt. We have no money. So they said, well, then you're going to have to destroy the film. So as we know, they didn't destroy all of them. Nobody really knows where they went. I was on a panel once in a big convention, and someone said, oh, I heard they went off to Argentina, and then they reappeared into America at the World's Fair in Chicago about 10, 15 years later, and the Americans had not signed the Berne Convention, so it was okay to show a film that was copyrighted or not copyrighted properly. I don't really know the answer to that, but I do know that there was a letter from the German lawyers back to the British Writing Society. Says, would you like us to pursue this? We understand the film has been shown again. And the British Writing Society said, no, Mrs. Stoker's already sold the rights. So it must have been after the rights were sold to Universal sometime late 20s or so. My inclination is the British Writing Society didn't get any of the settlement money. So they didn't want to pursue something where they weren't going to get any more money out of these guys. But nonetheless, in a way, even though she set a precedent and a copyright infringement was charged against these people, which is good for people like me and some of you listeners that are involved in making films or music. We shouldn't allow these things to happen. But it's also good that at least one copy of this did survive, because it's a heck of an atmospheric movie, and it's pretty cool to see it survive today. I know it's been played in Dublin at the Bram Stoker Festival, and since it has no lines to it, lots of cool music scores are adapted and played with it, which is fun. So let's enjoy a little clip from Nosferatu. So this is a Dracula figure that looks much more like Bram Stoker's, although Bram Stoker's Dracula had much more hair. But for good reason, he looked like a rat. And it's because the Germans had suffered through a plague in certain parts of Germany where rats were credited with carrying the plague around. And so they wanted to associate their vampire plague with the real thing. So we're going to get into some of the more modern adaptations now. And before we do it, just for the audience, take a look at some of these caricatures and see if any of them pop out at you, if you recognize any of your favorite ones before we delve into this. So this is a history in just a few minutes of many of these films, and see which ones you like, and you will see Dublin's Patrick Bergin in one of these.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
So I hope some of you at least have seen more than one of those. Certainly very, very prolific when you look at people like Christopher Lee, who's appeared in an awful lot of them. But that was a good chronological history to sort of keep us on our toes. But let's look closer at the history of Universal, which started the whole thing off with, of course, Bela Lugosi in 1931. And what we'll see in a moment, that at the same time in the same location, there was a Spanish version that was filmed. And I've managed to collect some of these off the internet and see some of the different posters, which are fun, and actually the combination of Abbott, Costello, Frankenstein, and Dracula all in one place. So here we go with one of my favorite clips of Bela, but recognize Renfield is in the castle. So here's an example of one of the earliest movie, 1931, where it's not Harker in the castle, it's Renfield. So already the mergers have begun. But pick up his accent, pick up some of the things that he actually says back and forth in the dialogue.
Boxes. Very well. I have chartered a ship. Take us to England. We will be leaving tomorrow evening. Everything will be ready. I hope you will find this comfortable. Thanks. It looks very inviting. Ouch. Oh, it's nothing serious, just a small cut from that paper clip. It's just a scratch. This is very old wine. I hope you will like it. Aren't you drinking? I never drink. Why? Well, it's delicious. And now I'll leave you. Well, good night. Good night, Mr. Renfield.
So you can pick up on that phonetic use of the English language. It just makes Dracula's voice just resonate to us. And then I won't say too much more about the Spanish language Dracula because the video clip explains it all. But apparently it's quite a common thing to have sets shared to share the expense. So without further ado, we will play that clip.
I am Dracula.
It's an iconic role from a game-changing movie.
Dracula, what's he done to you today?
Along with Frankenstein, it's credited as kicking off the Universal monster movie craze.
Rats, owls, millions of them.
So important that it was selected for preservation in the United States Film Registry by the Library of Congress.
Dracula. The very mention of the name brings to mind things so evil, so fantastic, so degrading. You wonder if it isn't all a dream, a nightmare.
But it isn't one of a kind.
Buenas noches, Señor Renfield.
While Todd Browning's Dracula was shot on the Universal lot during the day, a Spanish-language version of the film was shot at night, using the same sets and storyline, directed by George Melford. This was a common way of making movies in the early days of Hollywood and was done to create French, Italian, German, and in this case, Spanish versions of English language films.
Todo ser viviente.
The film starred Carlos Valerius as Conde Dracula,
La sangre de Drácula corre ya por las venas de la señorita Sua.
Barry Norton as Juan Harker,
Me miras de un modo tan raro.
and Lupita Tovar as Eva Harker.
Drácula. Vino.
Rather than come up with his own take on the character,
Venga.
Valerius was encouraged to study the English production's rushes every day so that he might imitate Bela Lugosi as closely as possible. To save on costs, some long shots of Lugosi and alternate takes of the English version were incorporated into the film. Having the advantage of being able to view the English dailies, the Spanish crew would go out of their way to find better camera shots and uses of lighting in an effort to top it. For this reason, some critics and enthusiasts say this movie is better than the original. The film was thought lost until a print was discovered in the 1970s and restored.
So along comes now, enter Christopher Lee with Hammer. Between 1958 and 1974. It was an interesting time when Peter Cushing comes along, and this duo of Christopher Lee and Cushing are incredible. But also, I'm going to realize what was going on with the censorship committees that were allowing things to be a little more promiscuous in these movies. You'll see it's the first time in 1958 that you actually see fangs on a Dracula and blood on his mouth. And we also begin to see much more skin tone, more cleavage of the females. And Eartha Pitt certainly had a stand in that as well. So you'll begin to see some of that. But as we know, the movies had to constantly evolve to keep people coming back into the theaters. And again, I keep saying that about Dracula. If they always had the same version, if it stayed the same with the same characters and slightly different adaptations, people would have gotten bored with it. But as a result, with these slightly new changes and mergers and all these different elements added to it, we keep coming back for more and more. And this was a perfect example of what Hammer did between 58 and 74. Christopher Lee deserves, his own clip right here. So I've got a few movies from him in this one.
Who has done this thing.
There is a girl of the Monsignor. Bring her to me.
Bring her to me.
You failed me. Punish. Now my revenge is complete.
Get that thing out of my sight. Move it away.
So you also see the red lining in the cape. And I believe that's because they could have the red in the face, so that was complementary, having the cape red as well. Now, as I said earlier, there's no question that sex sells, and you can see the bottom left-hand corner are the early brides in the 1931 version. The bottom right are the 1992 Ford Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola version, Bram Stoker's Dracula. In the middle, that's also Lucy being seduced by Dracula in sort of this werewolf type outfit. Carolyn Monroe up on the top right and left, and then Eartha Pitt on the left-hand side. Certainly some of the beauties. And I was lucky just in 2019 to have been with some of these ladies in Whitby, where they're still on the trail, on the Dracula trails, so to speak, and talking about their experiences. And we had a wonderful weekend at the Tomorrow's Ghost Festival. And if you didn't see your favorite women in Dracula movies in any of those photos, they're probably here as well. And now, one of my favorite dying scenes of Dracula, portrayed by Frank Langella. This to me is such an animalistic approach to a death scene. It's incredible. So I'll play that for you. So just before we get on to television, that's, you know, 1979, that's pretty cool to have such special effects being used for such an incredible death scene. Now, I don't know if you folks got any of these TV shows in Ireland, or if anyone's had a chance to see them over on YouTube. But when I was a young boy growing up in Canada, 64 to 66, I was a Munsters fan, and the Addams Family was competition on competing networks. Those were lots of fun. And Dark Shadows, to me, was an incredible show. It was a daytime drama, and so many followers to this show was incredible. As I said, I wasn't a big Buffy fan, not because I was against it. It's just something that wasn't interesting to me. But what it did show was that the strong female lead role turned the tables, stopped being the victim, and came back being the vampire hunter. And Angel was a spinoff of that. So really, between 77 and 2004, the whole Buffy and Angel franchise were absolutely huge. So let's just see some of these TV shows and clips. And then it's Major Competition.
They're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky. They're all together ooky, the Addams Family. Their house is a museum. When people come to see them, they really are a scream, the Addams Family.
Neat. Sweet. Petite.
So get a witch's shawl on, a broomstick you can crawl on. We're gonna pay a call on the Addams Family.
Obviously very spoofy, a lot of fun for a wide audience. And then Dark Shadows, the interesting thing about this, there is a cult following for this film, even this TV series, even though it ended in 1971. I've actually met people at the conventions that I go to that were such heavy duty fans of Dark Shadows. They would twice a year head up to Newport, Rhode Island in the US and go to this house in the bottom left-hand side, because the family that still owns it, they used to own it when the TV show was filmed there, and their relatives can't afford to keep it up. It's such a massive estate. And so rather than sell it, the fans of the show flock there twice a year, and they do routine maintenance and cleanups and painting and electrical work. They've all special skills. They go in there and share their love of the whole shows and talk about it and just pitch in so that this iconic location still stays in the hands of the people that allowed the show to be filmed there. In the young adult world, as we call it, cartoons for older children and grown-ups, you can see Dracula appeared in 77 in the show, in the series Scooby-Doo, Hotel Transylvania, and lots of different sort of older than little kid type TV shows. Now, these are also television shows that I watched growing up. Not sure if you guys ever got any of them, but shows like Gilligan's Island, The Brady Bunch, and F Troop. They all seem to have, especially around Halloween, some kind of cameo appearance about some sort of a Dracula creature. Sometimes they look like, just like you would expect it to be. Other times they're pretty far off. And then I do have to mention this Dan Curtis movie that went from a DVD to the television set with Jack Palance, who was a very good adaptation. Some people say it's the second most faithful adaptation of Dracula. And then in America, the NBC network put on a one-year series with Jonathan Rhys Meyers as the Dracula. But unfortunately, apparently some members of the cast couldn't control themselves very well. Some certain problems amongst the cast, and they couldn't keep filming. So that was a good effort. It was very different than Bram's story, but because of the cast problems, they couldn't keep going. And now there's one of my most favorite adaptations, very different still, is the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. It actually won 3 Oscar awards for costumes, effects, and makeup. And as I said earlier, Jim Hart explains in a unique manner how Vlad became a vampire in the first 4 minutes of the film. He combined fact and fiction and merged them to create another believable myth to satisfy their fans on how Vlad the Impaler became Count Dracula. Here's a clip.
Here occurred the frightening and shocking history of Prince Dracula and the woman he loved.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
Yeah, Dracula.
There's a sinister, darker side to him. I find irresistible. I have never met any man with such a passion for life. He is unlike any man. What are you?
Vampires do exist. This one we fight, this one we face, can take on many forms. He is both young and old. He can appear as mist, as vapor, as the fog, and he can vanish at will. The power of his evil desire has no end.
You've got to go to him. You've got to love him.
She is a willing recruit and devoted disciple. She is the devil's concubine.
Join me in eternal life.
Your salvation is his destruction.
I want to be what you are. I want to see what you see. I want to love what you love. Take me away from all this death.
Make no mistake, he must be stopped.
Certainly with a star-studded cast led by Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder, you got a good leg up on having a good movie, and I think this was a good adaptation. Let's look at the most faithful one though, with Louis Jourdan, BBC, 1977, most faithful to Bram Stoker's novel, in my opinion, and many other folks' opinion as well.
Do you know the significance of the kiss? You are nourishment to me, blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, my beautiful wine press. We shall cross land and sea together, land and sea.
and really on the other side of the spectrum, when something in horror becomes a spoof and a comedic spoof, you've really made it. One of my favorites actually is Old Dracula with David Niven. I've actually become friends with his son, David Niven Jr., and we've had some good laughs about his father's portrayal of Dracula. And then you see other ones below, George Hamilton, Leslie Nielsen. Many people just love these for what they are. I'm a big fan of What We Do in the Shadows. It's now gone into, I think it's third season of series, and we've got a good clip of it right now to show you.
It's nightfall.
He awakens.
Very cool, Master. Very scary. Thank you.
Nadja, Laszlo!
Yeah.
Yes?
Can you come downstairs for a second, please?
The problems with living with other vampires are the vampires I have chosen to stay with.
I wanted to talk about general hygiene in the cell. Last night, there were all these people down there, half drunk.
Well, where did they find the alcohol?
No, they were half drunk. They'd been half drunk.
If you've got something to say, then damn well say it.
It's not hygienic.
Nandor is like a big turkey.
Cannot pay with that.
I'm so sorry. Sir, you can't be throwing ancient coins at me.
Guillermo,
The credit
stab
card's
this
fine.
man. Guillermo is my familia.
I'm not a killer. I find people who are easy to kill.
Any virgins? I don't see how that's relevant.
Oh, that's werewolf piss.
Two werewolves. Colin, what are you doing in here?
This is my bedroom.
My name is Colin Robinson.
Hi, Deb.
And I am a energy vampire. We either bore you with a long conversation.
Hey, Don.
Or
Don.
we enrage you.
Something terrible is coming.
Master, this is pretty macabre.
Got my cake caught in the door.
Yank it out!
So if you haven't seen What We Do in the Shadows, it's worth a look if you like comedy spoofs. A little bit more animation for anybody that loves cartoons. You can see that Dracula's hit Flintstones, Sesame Street, Batman versus Dracula, Scooby-Doo, as I mentioned before, even The Simpsons and Bugs Bunny. He's everywhere you could possibly imagine. And then if you really like sort of adult versions of vampires, the two big series that really hit the world back in 2008 and 9, True Blood on HBO and Vampire Diaries. I actually did a season-ending DVD for the Vampire Diaries because they filmed in Atlanta, not very far from where I live. And they asked me to come in and take a look at their mythology on what started the whole thing. And I had to embarrassingly say, sorry, I don't watch the show, but my sister does. Maybe you want to talk to her instead. Not my thing, but lots of people absolutely love it. And then music. Gothic music adapted to Nosferatu and things are huge. And somebody told me, and I've never heard it, obviously, that Bauhaus, the band, actually one of the most famous songs is Bela Lugosi is Dead. So obviously a large influence in the Gothic community. Ballet is a little more up my line, but the Winnipeg Ballet and the Northern Ballet in the UK have put on Dracula ballets for a long, long time. Funnily enough, besides Halloween, Valentine's Day is one of the more popular times when the ballets are performed. That sort of love is forever type deal. And if you look at the pictures in the bottom right-hand corner, in my town here in Aiken, South Carolina, they have an Aiken Civic Ballet, and they talked me into doing an introduction for the play. And then they needed a couple of people for crowd scenes. So I got tricked into staying in my little costume here. And so now I can say I was in a ballet, but there was no dancing involved. Not to worry, nobody got hurt. But I did dance with some of the actresses in this scene, just sort of a waltz type deal. Opera, obviously this is big. for music and the dramatic sort of version of the opera, very big around the world. So you see Dracula now moving in all different types of stage between regular plays, ballet, and opera as well. And then, of course, there's radio. The iconic Orson Welles and John Houseman in 1938 actually did a Dracula, or a Red Dracula on the radio, which to this day people still absolutely love and replay many times. And then the games. Again, I'm not a gamer, but I know there's a lot of people that are, and one of my friends helped me pick out this slide to show which are the more popular ones. Apparently, Vampire the Masquerade is absolutely huge all over the world, as is Castlevania. And tourism, as you folks well know in Dublin, in your fair city, people come to the Bram Stoker Festival. Hopefully they'll be coming to Big Screen as well when we all get to enjoy more and get outside. But people come to look at the locations where the story took place in Romania. They go to London to see where the story took place. Whitby, where Bram was inspired in chapter 6, 7, and 8 took place. And then Forks, Oregon has nothing to do with Bram, but Forks, Oregon is where the stories of Twilight took place. And apparently people still flock there to go and see the Twilight filming locations. Now, recently, these guys appeared in the Bram Stoker Festival in Dublin just last year, Moffat and Gaddis and Mr. Moffat's wife and Claes Bang, and they premiered the trailer there. And this film, when it hit Netflix in late December, early January, was a big hit. Some people absolutely loved it. Some people hated it. I'm one of those folks that is very open-minded about reimagined version of Dracula, but I'm going to show you a clip from that. I thought it was very original and very cool. They actually did things that Bram Stoker didn't. Spent more time with Sister Agatha in the monastery where Harker escaped to, and more time in the Demeter. And I won't tell you about the third episode. If anybody wants to watch it, I don't want to spoil it, but it's a shocker.
Like a connoisseur in a wine cellar, one chooses one's vintages with care, the reds and the whites. I enjoy both.
There's something irresistible about having a go at such an iconic character, and as with Sherlock Holmes and Baker Street, briefly having the keys of the castle to play around with, it's irresistible and exciting.
I think Dracula is not so much that one would say this is a Dracula for now, is that Dracula is properly timeless. The thing that we thought we could try was to make Dracula the main character.
I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker. I am Dracula.
If you look at the book, he's not in it that much. He's in the first few chapters, and then he's in the background.
It's very rare that these opportunities come along to direct a classic like Dracula. I knew I was going to be in safe hands with Stephen and Mark, who are two massive uber fans of horror in general and Dracula in particular. If they were doing it, I wanted to be involved.
What attracted me to this project was the writing.
I felt so excited by the script because already there's something that comes with Dracula. Everybody's fascinated by Dracula. Everybody's fascinated by that character. Everybody can relate. So I was really interested to know what the scripts were going to be like, and they are brilliant.
It's a fantastic combination of being, on the one hand, very loyal to fans of the original Bram Stoker novel, but it's been filtered through Stephen and Mark's extraordinary imaginations, and they've created something very thrilling and contemporary as a result.
How can I not recognize her face? Well, you do look rather drained.
I am Claes, and I am playing Dracula.
The one thing they said is he has to be very tall and very handsome. Claes was really the only one that was in our sights, really.
He's brilliant as Dracula.
There's something in Claes' implacable black eyes and his sort of angular face and his amazing ironic looks that sell that at the same time. It's kind of perfect combination.
I think it's tricky with Dracula because he clearly is a monster, but he's always very charming and very debonair and very suave and looks great in a cape.
Why does death always come as such a shock to mortals?
So I think you're always conflicted there, and I think people like the bad boy as well. He gives everyone a great time and then kills them, unfortunately.
Try and stay calm. You're doing very well.
If you didn't see one of your favorite movies or TV shows, it's probably going to show up in this poster here because there's a little bit for everybody here. I'll let you stay on here for about 25 more seconds or so, and I'll alert Yeti that we're almost done, Yeti. There's certainly been an awful lot. And I remember at the beginning of the show, I said there's over 700 adaptations of, not adaptations, they're vampire movies with a Dracula in it. That doesn't count just the vampire movies without a Dracula in it. Just the ones with Dracula are 700 alone. So plenty of those. Find your favorite, and I will move on. And so this comes to the ending. Again, if you want to find out more about me or Bram Stoker, or if you like the newest things that we have just managed to get a hold of and have created, the Bram Stoker bobblehead, because when talking about pop culture, if you don't have a bobblehead, you haven't made it. And I made sure that now we've got a Bram Stoker bobblehead in the Bram Stoker Estate signature store, as well as my books. I wish I was in Dublin with you guys celebrating Halloween, because Ireland is the home of Halloween. And I'm convinced that the stories, the folklore, and everything Bram absorbed, that combined with his writing at the London Library, brought you the Dracula you guys know and love today. So thank you very much. Yeti, are there questions that you and I want to field for anybody tonight?
Well, there's been several comments about people's favorite Draculas throughout your presentation. For instance, Larissa's favorite Draculas were Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. And I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that. Beverly's favorite was George Hamilton in Love at First Bite. Ted says Buffy was the best thing. And yeah, a couple of participants agree with that, actually. And because she was such a badass, apparently. And Lisette loved the Munsters as a child. And Joe's vote goes to Louis Jourdan as Dracula in the BBC version from the 1970s, because he feels it was a very faithful presentation of Dracula. And someone else commented that we apparently never got to see Dark Shadows over here. So that's interesting. Yeah. And the Hardy Boys, or Nancy Drew, has an episode where they met Dracula. I didn't know that. And even Starsky and Hutch crosses paths with a vampire in one episode. So that's interesting. And Eva here says that as a child, which were her best Halloweens, she lived on the road behind Bram Stoker's house. And so that always made Halloween a little bit more cool and creepy. And Eva wonders, it's just got on me here now. Here we're back again. What do you think inspired Bram to write Dracula? Do you think it came from his mind, or ... something else?
Well, I do a whole 1 hour thing on, it's a perfect storm is what I call it. It's his early childhood illness, the stories he heard, the vulnerability he had, possibly the bloodlet, the story his mother told him about the cholera epidemic in Sligo, which I know many of you had been able to listen to. So he had that early sort of dark, macabre sense of imagination. And then he got to see Henry Irving playing Faust, the devil, on stage for many years. And there were other vampire movies. The Polidori, not movies, stage plays. The Polidori book was turned into a stage play. So there was plenty of other of these vampires really that were out there that Bram could have been inspired by. But now that we know that the London Library holds all of his books, and I've been there to look at them, and I've seen all the notes Bram wrote in the margins, I now have a better idea of what books he read, what information he has about Transylvania, about vampirism, trance walking, symbolism. So there's a lot of factual things that Bram merged with his early childhood imagination, and then the two books that he found Vlad Dracula in. So it really was this perfect storm of things that Bram brought together when writing that story, in my opinion.
And Dacre mentioned there the cholera epidemic, which is a story that Bram used to tell, Charlotte Stoker, Bram's mum, used to tell young Bram when he was a little boy. And in fact, Dacre has given us permission to put out a dramatized version of her eyewitness account, and it'll be online tomorrow. And it's full of people being buried alive and all those kind of gory things that used to happen way back in 1832. So that should be interesting for people.
I highly recommend you watch that, because I am convinced that that little boy, when he heard that story at first, and then years later asked his mother to type it up and send it to him, is proof that it was very important to him. And then he used the story to write Invisible Giant in Under the Sunset, one of his first books. So that's why I encourage Yeti to get that for you guys. And apparently there's a brilliant actress reading this to you. You really need to do it. And as you do, really think you're lying in bed as young Bram Stoker, who years later writes Dracula.
Fiacre said that you mentioned that the BBC version, well, I mentioned it as being the most faithful to Bram's novel that has ever been. And he wants to know what has been the least faithful adaptation you've seen, Dacre.
Well, it's hard to tell, because you never know if somebody is even trying to adapt it and be faithful. You know, if they just have a Dracula movie, but it's completely different characters, but it's still a count in a castle. So I really can't say there's one that failed miserably. So yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I think, you know, inspired by is what happens. But I'm going to give a pass on dissing somebody for not a good you know, attempt.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Esna spent her youth going to the Carlton Cinema on O'Connell Street in Dublin with her friends to see Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in Dracula. And tonight has brought back so many memories for her, which is lovely. She one of her favorites was Love Let the Light One In. Love Let the Right One In. And she saw the play in the Abbey Theatre. And she loved it because it was so sympathetic to the vampire girl, and it was marvelous. I have another question here from another participant, Deirdre, and she wonders, do you consider Dracula to be an erotic story?
Well, not Bram's version of it. There's a little bit of sensuality into it. It's really not erotic, but as the stories have become more modernized and the censors have allowed more, it has become, you know, more erotic. But, you know, usually it's when somebody adapts like True Blood or Vampire Diaries or an X-rated version that it can be, because, you know, when you really consider the sort of the biting of the neck, you know, the mesmerizing of the victim, you know, the blood, a fluid exchange, you know, then it could be interpreted, of course, in the amount of flesh that you show and, you know, what goes on. So it could be, but to me, I look at more of a partly a horror story, but I'm actually working on an annotated Dracula, and Robert Etienne-Bassang, who was a very good friend of mine. I'm not sure if many of you have heard, but he passed away about 3 weeks ago, unexpected, about 10 days after we finished the book. And to properly give Robert his due, he said to me, Dacre, you know, it's taken a long time, but I believe Dracula is really Mina's story. It's a story of a female who shows great sympathy towards Dracula, great mercy. And God is working in many ways in Mina's mind, even as she has seen her good friend Lucy being turned into a vampire, staked, head cut off. She's merciful after the conversion has started. And she tells the band of heroes as they're about to go and try to capture and destroy Dracula to be merciful. On top of that, she is really typified as the modern woman, knowing how to use a typewriter and a recording phonograph. So I don't see that as erotic. I see it as a powerful woman statement, because Bram really had a feminist side to him, because his mother was a really hell of a good role model. So I'm sorry I'm rambling, but you got me going. That's a good question.
Dacre, I know you've had a very long day of presentations, so we might finish on a very last question. It's actually two questions. First of all, have you ever visited Bram's house?
Yes, I got very lucky when it was sold recently from one owner to the present owners, and it was being renovated. My cousin, Douglas Appleyard from Dublin, said, "You got to come over." And I came over for another reason, but we came and the contractors let us in. So I'd seen it when the previous owners had it, but I also got to see it when they were stripping down some of the coverings of the wall, the wallpaper, the molding. And I got to really see it, what it was like when the Stokers lived there, which was a real treat.
And very, very last question. Someone asked, interests can run in families. It can be almost an hereditary thing. Have you ever felt that same interest in the macabre and spooky things? Well, I suppose that brings you to your interest in Dracula, doesn't it?
Well, that's kind of what spurred me on to write about Bram and to follow in his footsteps with his interests. But I'm really not a dark person. I spend a lot of time doing sport and outdoors. But I will say this. This is a good one to end on, Yeti. In Marsh's library, when I was in Dublin last year for the festival, and I didn't know Marsh's had a history of being haunted by the Archbishop. But I found out later, I was downstairs. They sent me downstairs to go to the room to get set up for my presentation on a day that I was doing a rehearsal. And the lights all went out. And they had these motion lights. And I was disoriented, had my computer with me in the backpack, had my phone with me, and I had to turn the phone on to use the little light to go where I was going. You see, I've actually got the first Irish edition of my phone. And that got me through. And then I got in and my computer, the battery was dead. And it had never happened before. So I wasn't sure if maybe the Archbishop or somebody, some hunting, but I felt some weird thing happened that night. And I, to this day, I can't really explain it. So there's a little bit of me that is open-minded like Bram was about mysteries we can't explain. They think they may be out there and I'm open-minded to accept them. Hopefully they'll be kind to me.
Dacre, thank you very much on behalf of the Big Scream. I think everyone will agree that it was a really enjoyable evening and a really good start to our Halloween. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Yeti, and have a wonderful time. I wish I was there to celebrate and go out and have a glass of wine later on, but not going to happen this year. But hats off to you and your committee again. Best of luck. And remember, Ireland is the home of Halloween, the birthplace of Dracula, as you folks well know.
Well, it'll give you some comfort that none of us are going anywhere for a glass of wine tonight. So
have to have one on our own.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.